Good afternoon. My name is James Davis. We are doing a webinar today on how to choose the right tenant. Before I make a start, just to let you know how webinars work, is I'm going to run through some slides. You can hear me and see the slides that I'm going to put up in front of you, but we can't hear you. But what you can do is through the chat box on the right-hand side is participate by either posing questions in the chat box there, or send any messages that you want to send through to us to answer, or anything you would like to share with us. We're also going to do a couple of polls during this webinar, as I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on your business and how you're running it all. Do please make plenty of notes, and hopefully it'll be really useful for you. We're going to talk for sort of 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we'll have a few Q&As. And hope everybody finds it useful. So to get cracking, those people that haven't met me or don't know me, I've been a landlord for the last 16 years, and I've got properties in northwest London and in Swansea. And it was off the back of that that I launched Upad nearly 5 years ago, as I got frustrated with using existing offerings for finding tenants. And in the last 12 months, we've now let just over 9,500 properties. But the most interesting thing from my perspective is the amount of inquiries we generated from tenants, which has just gone over the 250,000 mark in the last 12 months, which has given us some huge insights of tenant behaviour, what makes people attracted to a certain property over others, etc. So what we're going to run through today as an agenda is what kind of tenants are right for you, how to attract to your target market, who are the right type of people that should be letting into your property, how to screen tenants over the phone when you have that initial phone call from tenants wanting to organise a viewing, what sort of things you should be asking them at that moment in time, and then moving on to the viewing, what you should do to prepare for it, and also questions you should ask people at that viewing, so that all of this allows you to decide on who's the right tenant for your property, rather than just sort of making a guess. And I think the whole purpose of this webinar is to do as much due diligence as you can before you choose who you want to move into your property, so you can have a good tenant in your property rather than somebody that may not pay the rent on time or cause issues, which clearly none of us want, and try and de-risk that as much as possible. So in terms of what kind of tenants are right for you, and who is your target market, what I'm just going to sort of run through is just the main sort of tenant groups that exist out there. You've obviously got sort of young professionals in their 20s and 30s, a lot of tenants are on housing support, not so much so in London now, but outside of London, because capping has had less effect. There's a lot of tenants that are taking housing benefit. There's a lot of pros and cons to consider. An increasing amount of companies are now being tenants, so it's worth bearing that in mind. And there's an argument of getting longer tenancy agreements, etc., through that channel. The student market is growing ever more. The fees that have come in to go to university haven't had any effect of dampening tenant demand there, and it's really becoming quite a growth area. And finally, second before finally, is sharers, which in HMO properties, individual rooms, which has also grown quite dramatically, and also families has increasingly grown as a tenant group that is out there. And I just think it'd be good to do a quick poll from what you think of all of those has grown the most in the most recent years, in the last 2 or 3 years or so. So if you can select one of these options, and these 5 options, whether you think young professionals, those on housing benefits, companies, students, sharers are the ones that have grown the most, would be really great if you can select all of those. If you can just press one of the options that you feel is relevant for you and then press submit, that will be grand. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to select the option that is most relevant for them. And just to see what the results are. So the overwhelming majority of people think that it's young professionals and housing benefit tenants that have grown the most. What's actually been the case, actually, and some people have got it right, is the amount of sharers in terms of one-person households and also families has become the most amount of growth in terms of tenant demand. So just going back to our presentation, what you can see here is that families and people with one person in the household, in terms of it being a studio flat, for example, has been the biggest growth. And it's just worth considering, therefore, in the properties that you're letting out, who do they appeal to, and trying to make sure that you appeal to as many tenants as you possibly can, to maximise the potential people that can move into your property. So in terms of what tenants are right for you, I think things to consider is to look at what the area is, what the size of your property is, how it's furnished or not, whether it's pet friendly and smokers, and what rental level you're looking to achieve, and also what the local amenities are. And I think it's worth considering what the group are that you're trying to appeal to, whether it's students or families, for example, of what is going to be important to them, and try and make your property fit to that particular group as much as possible. And so even down to the description for your property in your advert is what is available in that local area is really important, more so now than just what's inside the property. So it's worth considering including a lot of information about the local amenities, gyms, restaurants and transport links, etc. All very worthwhile putting in there. So just consider making your property appeal to the right type of tenant group that you're after. In terms of attracting your target market, I think we just need to consider and make our property appeal as much as we possibly can to what a tenant group is physically after when they're looking to move into their property. But the other things that are worth considering and being aware of outside of whichever group you're looking at is that broadband is now very much an essential service. I think we're all aware that when you move into a new property, whether it's a place you've just purchased or a rental, is the gas, the water and electricity all work as soon as you walk into the property. But to get your broadband up and running can take a couple of months by the time you've had someone come around to connect it and the equipment's arrived and all that type of stuff. So broadband is very much an essential service from a tenant's perspective, and it may be worth considering including that within the rent as more and more tenants see that as an essential rather than just a luxury. The other things I thought I'd just sort of bring up here is the turn-offs from a tenant perspective. So when you are doing viewings and also when you're getting the photographs done, just consider all the points you've got on here that, if the bathroom is filthy, if the garden is sort of unkept, it's going to be a real turn-off from a tenant's perspective. And I think you've got, a good 10, 15 seconds when somebody walks into a property to make that first impression count. And so if they walk in and it needs updating or the front of the house is a right mess, it's going to be a real turn-off and they're not going to be interested in their property. So consider these factors to try and overcome and come up with ways to overcome them, making sure the place is spick and span before tenants start doing viewings. If you've got tenants in situ, maybe incentivize them to keep the place tidy, or offer to get a cleaner in on the day of viewings, or a couple of days a week whilst you're doing viewings, so that you don't have these issues when you're letting out your property, because they're a real turn-off when you've got new tenants coming around to see the place. Now, before you do a viewing, there's a few questions that I think are worth asking people. And at the time when somebody calls you to organise a viewing, and also at the viewing, you've got two opportunities there to do some due diligence on who is going to be letting your property. And I would suggest you get a pen and paper out or scribble down on your computer each person that is interested in your property, their name, their contact details, and ask them all some targeted questions to see if there's a good fit. And keep this book or this notepad with you when you're asking tenants over the phone what time they want to come round, and ask them some questions also at the viewing as well, so that at the end of it, when you've got maybe 2 or 3 people that have put an offer in, is you can refer back to your notebook to make an informed decision of who is right for your property and who is not, because you've done this sort of extra level of due diligence. And I think they're really helpful because about 90% of all tenant issues can be eliminated by asking the right questions at the time of viewings and when you're on the phone to them. So just to sort of crack on with this, how to screen tenants over the phone, ask them questions like, when are they looking to move? Why are they looking to move? How long do they look to stay in your property for? Do they know what the property is about, what you're actually offering? Where do they work? And what their salary is. And I think these are really useful questions for very different reasons. When they're looking to move, we'll give you an indication of whether it's this week or next month. Not all tenants read the description of a property in terms of when it's available. So it's worthwhile doing this extra level of due diligence to sort of just make sure that these people are right for you. Do they know what you're offering? You know, make sure that They understand about the number of bedrooms, where the property is, whether there's parking, all those sort of things. And the other bit about asking about salary is it's really important to know what their salary is to see whether they can afford the property or not. And whilst if you end up referencing tenants, on the form will say their monthly income is £1,500, if you actually ask somebody over the phone or indeed at a viewing, their reaction is going to be worth 50 times more than what it will be on a form. And if they start stuttering and what have you, it'll be giving you an indication of whether they're telling the truth or not. And I just thought that the salary bit is quite important, and there's two key reasons. One is you want to make sure that the tenants that are potentially interested in your property can afford it. But also, the other thing that we should also be aware of as landlords today is there is a growth of unsecured debt that we all have. The average household in the UK now has nearly £9,000 of unsecured debt, so credit cards, loans and what have you. And this has grown by about 14% in the last 12 months. And so we just should be aware of what people's salary is and what their commitments are to see whether they can afford the rent. So to that end, I think it'd be good just to do a quick poll to see what everybody in the room thinks is a sensible proportion of somebody's rent that should be, somebody's salary should be spent on rent. Do you think no more than 10% of their take-home pay should go on rent, or do you think 50% is acceptable? So if you can select one of those options, that would be much appreciated. I'll just give everyone a chance to select that button and press the submit option there. And let's see if we've got all the results in. Just bring it all up here. So actually everybody seems to be pretty much in the right ballpark. Most people going for the 30 to 40% of someone's take-home pay should be spent on rent as a maximum, and that's very much accurate. This is this chart I've got in front of, I was going to bring up now, shows what actually is the case in the UK, and what you can see is the 20 to 40% being the largest sector of what people's take-home pay is. And the reason we say, this sort of 30% point is I think that gives enough flex for, paying for travel and food and everything else that people are paying for. I think the second that they're paying a larger proportion of their salary on rent, there should be an alarm bell going off in your mind, and ideally, you want it as low as you possibly can, so that from an affordability perspective, they can afford to stay in your property. So that would be a good range to sort of stick to, of the 30, possibly up to 40% of someone's take-home pay. Now, preparing for a viewing, you've got maybe 5 or 6 people that have expressed an interest in your property, and you've organised times for them to come round. One thing I'm a big fan of doing is text maybe an hour or 30 minutes beforehand, just to confirm that they're coming at the agreed time. Maybe put in that text for them to confirm back that they will be there at 12 o'clock or whenever that slot is, just to get confirmation. I think is a really worthwhile and important thing to do, and maybe say if they don't confirm, then you will not be attending, because there's nothing worse than having sort of a wasted time of doing a viewing. So it's worthwhile sending a text sort of 30 minutes, an hour beforehand, just to confirm that they are intending on turning up. When you use Upad and you put all your property details in, all your information, your description, all gets put together as a PDF brochure, and it's worth printing off a few copies so you can give to people, because most tenants are doing maybe 3, 4, 5 viewings of properties in a few days, and it must be the same when we're looking at buying property. It can become a bit of a blur the day after of which property was which, etc. So if you can print off a copy or email them a copy of your property brochure, it would be really helpful for them, A, to make notes on, but just a refresher of what their property was like, because it can be very easy to miss out on what was actually within the place. So that's quite a useful sort of tool and worth sort of considering. Be as flexible as you can when you're doing viewings. One thing I'm a fan of is doing block viewings. Obviously, most people do viewings sort of in the evening and weekends, so maybe do 1 or 2 block viewings during the week and maybe 1 slot on the weekend. And depending on how long you've got before your existing tenants move out, maybe based on how flexible you should be. But I'm a big fan of block viewings, partly because it cuts down on our time and any wastage. But also, if there's 4 or 5 people that turn up, it creates demand for your property, and it looks like there's more people competing with it. So I really am a big fan of doing block viewings for both of those reasons. Bring a list of the people you've been talking to on the phone. We mentioned it earlier, whether it's your notebook or what you've got on computers, and just keep that up to date with who's turned up, any feedback they've said about will the furniture be moved out, or is Wi-Fi included, all of those sort of things, and keep sort of a spreadsheet together of what each person has said, and be on time also. Whilst tenants are notoriously sort of turn up 5-10 minutes late, it's just good practice for you just to be there on time. Don't forget, you're in effect running a business. Tenants are our customers, and it sets a bad impression if you turn up 5-10 minutes late, and you might have missed an opportunity of a couple of people who have left to go and see somewhere else. So be aware and just do your prep work prior to doing a viewing. And then at a viewing, whilst tenants are going to ask you various questions about the property and when it's available, etc., use this as an opportunity to get a real gut feel about what each person is actually like. You've done your initial questions over the phone. You now want to sort of take that up a gear and get a real good understanding about, is this person right for this property? Would I be happy with him or her living there? And try and just sort of filter down your spreadsheet of people that you've got is sort of the aim of the game, I guess, here. So you might want to ask people whether this property is just for them or whether they're sharing with other people. Where do they work and how long have they been there? Are they an employee or a contractor? And again, while some of these things will come up when you're doing the referencing, actually when you do it over face to face, people's reactions, as I mentioned earlier, are really worth taking on board. How they reply back to your inquiries is a really important, and so it's good to ask these questions and use the opportunity you've got when you're in front of people to ask them some of these sort of probing questions. Ask them whether they can supply a landlord reference or their employer's reference. Again, whilst it will normally come up within referencing, their reactions will be really important to you about what their existing landlord would say, what their employer would say about them, and what is their move date. Again, so many people seem to have a misunderstanding about when the property is available and when they're looking to move. So ask some of these detailed questions. There's quite a few others that we can probably go through in the Q&A as well that are worth considering. But try and ask probing questions, try and get a better gut feel about what each person is like, so that those that do put an offer in, you can make an informed decision about which one is right for you, rather than going with a uninformed decision, because I think there's nothing worse than having a tenant in your property that's not looking after it or stop paying the rent. I'd rather have it vacant, and so doing sort of this level of due diligence I think is a really worthwhile exercise. Deciding on the right tenant is really important. It's just too easy just to take the first person that says yes, I really like it. So don't feel you're rushed. Don't go with necessarily the first person that's put an offer in. If somebody, if you've had your property on the market for a few weeks and then somebody comes along and offers you the asking price, maybe offers to pay 6 months up front, just don't automatically think, yeah, I've got to take it. It's been empty for 3-4 weeks. It's costing me however. It is better to have a property that is vacant than have a bad tenant in there. So don't rush into something. Do take your time and make an informed decision, because it can cost you in the long run. Go with your gut instinct. When you've spoken to somebody on the phone, you've met somebody, it's really important to go with what your gut says about that person. Is that person like-minded? And all those sort of things are worth considering. Make sure you do reference your tenants and check out the affordability. I know we mentioned a bit about unsecured debt earlier. There's sort of a growth of people wanting to see tenants' bank statements. I can sort of understand why. You want to see if rent has been paid on time in the past, whether they're paid on time, whether they've got any other commitments for unsecured loans and credit cards, etc. But do check out affordability in referencing so that you feel comfortable. I think as a landlord we all have different risk profiles, and based on how risk averse you may be, is sort of determines how much referencing you do on the tenants. Always take a deposit. It might sound a bit of a surprise to say this, but not everybody does. And I think it's sort of a necessity. it is likely there will be works that will need doing when the tenant moves out that are over and above wear and tear, and you need some level of protection for that. If they stop paying the rent, all those sort of things means that it's very sensible to take a deposit. And of course, it has to go in one of the 3 government-approved schemes that are out there. Upad works with a couple of them, but it's just imperative that you put your deposit into one of those schemes, and always use an AST, an assured short-hold tenancy agreement. If you are, obviously if it's a business, like a commercial let. You can't use an AST there, but if it's just individuals you're letting to on a 3 to 6 month, on a 6 or 12-month basis, using an AST is an absolute imperative to avoid any issues that may come in the future. The other thing as well that I think is just worth mentioning at this moment is at the viewing or just afterwards, if somebody's expressed an interest and they are interested in the property and you like them, it can be worthwhile taking a holding deposit, maybe the equivalent of a couple of weeks' rent or 1 week's rent, sort of an amount that isn't sort of £50 where people will give up if they find another property that they prefer, for example. And for that holding deposit, it is in advance of the full deposit, so it's not in addition to, but should they choose to not take the property, then it doesn't get refunded. And general practice is if you have a change of mind, you can't hang on to that deposit either. But it generally shows a commitment level whilst tenants go through the referencing process there and afterwards. So hopefully that was all useful. We seem to be sort of pretty much on time, which is fantastic. We've got time for a few questions that we've got come in. So if you haven't put any questions through to us yet, you'll see the chat box on the right-hand side of the box, and if you click on the chat section, you can put a question through to us, and I will try and answer as many as we possibly can. Don't worry if you feel that it's a very basic question or something you're just not sure of. Please use this as a platform to ask any question that you would like, or anything that I've been talking about that is unclear, and I will try to get through with them as best as I possibly can. So first couple of questions that are coming through is, what's the best time for viewings at weekends and during the week? Well, I think it very much depends, first of all, on who you are letting to, and I think let's just assume that it's working individuals that are at work from 9 till 5:30ish, Monday to Friday. I think there's 2 key spikes when people are looking for their next rental. One is on a Friday afternoon when they're trying to get maybe 3 or 4 viewings in their diary for the weekend. And there's another spike on sort of a Monday, Tuesday-ish, where people have either given notice to their landlord or their landlord has given them notice, and they're spending the first couple of days of the week looking on Rightmove and Zoopla for their next rental. So those are the 2 key times when tenants start their search for looking for their next rental. I think to react to that, to do maybe 1 or 2 block viewings during the week at maybe 6:30 or 7, I think are the ideal times during the week. On the weekend, I think an early afternoon slot works quite nicely. Sort of 2, 3 o'clock on a Saturday should suffice. I think there's more viewings that occur on a Saturday than a Sunday. But outside of that, if your property is in an area where there is not a lot of tenant demand, or your existing tenants have already moved out or about to move out very soon, you may want to be a bit more flexible and sort of fit in more with when tenants want to come and see the property, because at the end of the day you're trying to get it let as fast as you possibly can, so you want to try and fit in as many viewings as you possibly can during the sort of the week or 2 when you put it on the market. But the sort of 6:30, 7 in the evening during the week and 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think are the sort of key times. A couple of people asking about percentage of income on rent. So this should be people's take-home pay. So if somebody just very crudely earns gross £2,000 per month, which is £24,000 per annum, their take-home pay is roughly about £1,500, and it's their take-home pay, the figure after they've paid their national insurance and tax, what physically goes into their bank account that you should make sure the rent is no more than 30 or 40% of that figure, rather than the gross. It's what goes into their bank account on payday that you should be looking at there. A couple of people saying, what's the best way to ask for what their monthly income is? On a viewing or over the phone, I would just ask people, what is their take-home pay? And if you just say it as a question like that, and quite black and white, how they react is really interesting. And what I mean by that, if they start going and you might think that their salary isn't static every month. Maybe it varies because maybe they're sort of a consultant. Maybe they're not going to lie about what their figure actually is. But people, should know off the top of their head what their take-home pay is on a monthly basis. So how they react to it is really important. And I think just coming out with it and asking a very straightforward question to that effect is probably the best way of going about it, rather than tiptoeing around the issue, for example. I think that's somebody that makes sense. A couple of people are sort of talking about what's the best way to say no to somebody. So I've been here before myself. You've done your sort of due diligence, and you've got your little mini spreadsheet that you've been putting together of who you would let to and who you would not. Let's just say somebody who's fallen into the have not bracket has said no, they really like it, they would have put a holding deposit down and to secure it, but you are just not keen on them. I think don't feel you have to make a decision there and then. Tell that person or people that you're doing other viewings later today or later in the week, and then you will make a decision. Make sure you tell them you've got their contact details, and you will get back to them later today or at the end of the week with who you would be happy to let your property to. Maybe say that you've had a couple of people express an interest up until now, and say, look, let's hold off with you giving me a holding deposit right now, but I will come back to you by the end of the week, and then give them a steer on, at that moment say, apologies, there's somebody else that I think is just better suited to the property. You don't need to give into reasons as to why, but just say, look, I'm sorry, I've decided to let the property to somebody else. I wish you all the very best in the future. A couple of people asking about holding deposits. So a holding deposit generally is not refundable. It is there for the tenant to give 1 week's or 2 weeks rent, as an example, to secure the property whilst they go through the referencing process. It's worthwhile getting something in writing between the pair of you that the tenants have paid you £300, £200, and that money is to be deducted off their deposit for the property overall, and certainly not in addition. If a tenant decides then to go to a different property, they found somewhere else that they like, then they lose that deposit because they've chosen to go with somebody else, and it's to compensate you for the hassle factor of starting the referencing off or taking it off the market, for example. And the same applies if you have a change of heart and you'd rather let it to somebody else. It is not fair and reasonable for you to hold on to that holding deposit, and you should return that back to the tenants, although it's sort of a bit of bad practice if you go down that road. The point of the tenants paying you a holding deposit is to sort of verbally bind the pair of you that you are both interested in this property, and that is the intention you should be going into it for. In terms of the amount of overall deposit you should be charging tenants, it used to be the case a couple of years ago of 4 to 6 weeks rent as deposit. Now I think it's very much about 6 weeks, and sort of increasingly hearing more about 6 to 8 weeks or 6 to 2 months being held as a deposit. I think it depends on how much rent you are charging. If it's in sort of in London and the monthly rent is, for argument's sake, sort of £2,000 or £3,000 a month, I think sort of holding £6,000 is probably excessive, but increasingly people are asking for a bit more than 6 weeks. So bear that bit in mind. We've got time for a couple more questions. Thank you very much for sending them through. If anybody else has got any, do please post them. But we'll try and answer a couple more that have come through to me. People asking on referencing if people are being self-employed. Now, the issue when people are self-employed is what their drawings are is generally a very different figure to what their what they live off. So things do vary. You can obviously get their accountant to give you a letter to say what their drawings are or what the profit is of their business, those sort of things. I would ask to see maybe their personal bank statements to see if they're drawing a regular amount from the business or whether it's sporadic. But I think that those sort of things will help if you're going down the route of referencing somebody that is self-employed. A couple of people asking about if you're using Upad to register the deposit and collect the rent. We have a very simple process in play for doing that. We have a package called the tenancy sign up, which consists of collecting the first month's rent, the deposit, getting the tenancy agreement all done for you all. It's a very easy process. You can speak to anybody in the team 7 days a week and they will run through that with you, but we take the hassle factor out of it for you in terms of making sure the right prescribed information is given to your tenants, etc., etc. And a couple, I think, last question that's sort of just come through. A couple of people saying about tenants that smoke. There is nothing wrong with asking people whether they smoke, but and this is an area where it's a bit like within employing people about what you can and cannot ask and whether it's acceptable to take that into account. What is acceptable is to say that people are not allowed to smoke within the property. But what is unfair and unreasonable is to tell somebody that if they are a smoker, they can't rent your property. As long as they smoke outside and that there is no smoking inside, then that is fair and reasonable. But just the fact that somebody smokes shouldn't be a reason why you don't want them to be in your property. But you can obviously stipulate within the tenancy agreement about whether smoking is allowed inside or outside the property. Telling people they can't smoke outside is a very difficult one, and it's not really enforceable. It's more about whether they are allowed to on the inside. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. I'm keen we try and sort of stick to time. We said we'd sort of do sort of 30 minutes-ish today. There will be an email you will get shortly, which can give you some feedback options on what you thought of this webinar. I really would appreciate any feedback you've got on how we can improve things next time. Maybe there's other subject matters that are worth covering off. Indeed, there's an option if you want to put your friends or colleagues' name in so they can watch the webinar the next time we do this. It's very much there. And then what you will get in an hour or two is a copy of the recording of this webinar. So if you've missed it or you arrived a little bit late, you'll be able to listen again later on at your leisure. Just leaves me to say thank you very much indeed for taking the trouble for listening and watching the webinar we've just run through. My name is James Davis from upad.co.uk, and I hope you found it really worthwhile and can help you in your business. Thank you very much indeed, and I wish you a very good day. Take care. Bye.